Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Welcome back to another Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. And of course, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Miranda LaBant. Thanks for joining me again, Dr. LaBant. And again, as I mentioned, we'll be announcing, we're going to have a series upcoming where it's just she and I talking about some things I think you're going to find very valuable and very interesting in the arena of folk medicine. And we'll really dive into the science there. And that's what we're doing today. And we're in this beautiful winery down here in Valle de Guadalupe, Finca La Carrodilla. And interesting, I had to say that about 20 times off script so that I could get that right. And I got thumbs up. So this is a organic winery here, and we are here talking about the benefits of organic wine. And we dropped a few quotes from a recent article from the general surgeon, one that said there is no safe level of alcohol to drink, doctor says, not even one glass of red wine per day. We kind of critiqued that and broke that apart yesterday at the Misiones de California winery with Raul. But he had another interesting quote that I want to drop here and really start us off with. People, quote, use it as a crutch for social interactions and for emotional reasons. Dr. LaBant, apparently, we've been insulted here because we think that there's science that supports wine and its health benefits, but apparently we're shallow emotionally. That's what he's insulting us. Yeah. I mean, I can't believe it, but you found that article. Mm-hmm. And what we want to do here is actually dispel these kind of falsehoods and just narratives, if you will, and bring it with science.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is so much evidence around the consumption of wine. Actually, we talked a lot about that in our first episode, but the prior claims of even one glass of wine per day having health benefits of being anti-inflammatory, cardiovascular benefit, those are now being sort of pushed aside, and also claiming that people are using, every single person having a glass of wine or consuming alcohol is using it as an emotional crutch, right? That's, I think, poorly inappropriate.
Well, I think it's interesting because when you look, there was a 50-state survey published in the fall of 2024 that they found that 40% of patients trust doctors and hospitals, meaning 60% don't. And I think it's statements like that, the derogatory, authoritative speak down to the patient, that I think does nothing to build bridges for trust, but actually sows more distrust and widens the chasm. And what we need to do is be honest with patients. Patients, you're smart. We're all patients at a time as well. I'm always amazed at how smart you are. And I think doctors are scared of that in a way. But this bothers me, and it should bother you too. So hopefully we can end what he said here with some science. And I want to start off here, actually give just a very quick timeline here. But in 1995, an article was published in British Medical Journal, not your throwaway journal, but it was entitled Mortality Associated with Moderate Intakes of Wine, Beer, and Spirits. So there's this concept I think we have to dispel, Dr. LaBant. It's that, yes, alcohol is within wine, and yes, alcohol itself can be bad in excess, but it's a component within wine of which there's many other components. And so, and I'd love to get your take on it, because what they found in this is that the risk of dying steadily decreased with increasing intake of wine. Now, I'm sure the general surgeon would not exactly agree with that, but this was the study. And they found a relative risk of 1 for subjects who never drank wine, meaning no increase, no decrease. But they found that this relative risk reduced to 0.51, which is a 49% decrease for those who drank 3 to 5 glasses of wine a day. Now, that would be classified over the moderate amount. But what's really interesting is there was no decreased benefit, no decreased risk or benefit from the intake of beer or spirits. So I think that study right there from 1995 kind of disproves this concept that alcohol, yes, it's bad, but it's the wine that's different.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, I want to go into the different components there, but I want to bring to this conversation a recent 2025 meta-analysis comparing, does white wine or red wine matter? What is the difference there? And obviously we're going to talk about some of those components, but they collectively looked at all of these different studies and found that in over 100,000 people that they had collected this data from, they found wine was not associated with overall risk, especially for developing cancer. And in fact, they actually found that wine it had an inverse, as you were saying, an inverse relationship to disease risk, right? And so that's fascinating. And so I think we should talk about the different components of wine and why is it different than just alcohol. Alcohol is really ethanol, which is a higher concentration, and it's mostly in spirits, right? It is a small component of wine. Wine is typically about 85% water, and then the rest of it, usually 9 to 15% of that is alcohol. Yeah. But wine in itself has the lowest alcohol content of beer, wine, when you collectively look at it as a consumable beverage. But it has these other components that are what make wine so special, right? It has these polyphenols, or these plant compounds that provide these wonderful benefits. And so these are things like flavonols, and those would be something like the tannins. Quercetin is actually a flavanol, and it's in wine. But these flavonoids give the wine that like mouthfeel and that texture. People talk about tannins, and that's what gives the wine either that it's really dry or not. So these are the chemicals in the wine, but a lot of them have the ability to produce or have effects within the body, right? Yeah. And then the big one that we talked about in our previous episode is resveratrol, which is a non-flavonoid polyphenol, and that is really where I think the bread and butter is when it comes to the health benefits of wine.
Yeah, and I think, and again, we kind of touched on this yesterday, but I think it's important here because, again, where he's coming from, the general surgeon here in his statement, it's a very compartmentalized reductionist viewpoint. But what we're actually doing is we're saying, look, what the science really suggests now, 1995 and now 2025, they're basically saying the same thing, yet separated by 30 years, is that it's the context of the wine in total. Again, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really kind of a holistic principle, which is more in line with how you've been trained. And it's been one that I've learned to appreciate over the decades of practice. It's not something I was taught. It was something you were taught, and it's something that I've learned to appreciate and see as intense value. And so it's something that I think that conventional docs either don't know about, don't think about, or don't appreciate it. So you mentioned that, and let me close with this, because what they also found is that in the spirits, there was an increased risk of dying from 1, that's no increased risk, to 1.34, so 34% increased risk for drinking 3 to 5 drinks of spirits per day. So you can see not only was there not a decreased risk, there was actually an increased risk when you had the same consumption. But what they said, interesting really, in kind of a mic drop moment, the effects of the 3 types of alcohol drinks seem to be independent of each other. So let's dive into those individual components, because you brought it up about what's the difference between red wine and white wine that's providing those different benefits. And we'll get into some different grapes, different regions, but you've done some good research there. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Sure. Well, the main difference between red and white wine is not just the color, it is how the wine is made. But the biggest component is, where is that resveratrol within the winemaking process or within the fruit itself? And it's in the skin of the grape. And so the main difference between red and white wine is the resveratrol content, not just the color or the taste or the residual sugars. But so when red wine is processed, they use the skin of the grapes to ferment in making that wine or that juice. And so that is where that resveratrol compound comes from. When they're making white wine, they're actually just using the juice from the grapes. The skin is really not involved in that process. So by nature, red wine, and that's why we're talking about all of this, has higher compounds of resveratrol. But the amount of resveratrol can vary from grape to grape or region to region, and I think that's what's really fascinating. There are, interestingly, one of my favorite regions has the highest amounts of resveratrol, and it tends to be in usually cooler climates. So places like Burgundy, France, Oregon, Bordeaux, these are cooler climates, and we see in those areas higher levels of resveratrol because the grapes are among more stress in nature. They're having to protect themselves, and because resveratrol has these really profound antioxidant compounds, the grapes produce more of it when they're stressed to the elements of nature. But then we have the different classes of grapes, and there are so many depending on what region or what country you're in. Interestingly, Pinot Noir grapes have the highest amounts of or concentrations of resveratrol because the skin of the Pinot Noir grape is the thinnest, and because it's so thin, it makes those grapes again more vulnerable to the forces of nature. So the thinner the skin is, the more resveratrol it has to produce to protect itself. Other wines that have higher concentrations of resveratrol are Nebbiolo, which I know you're a fan of.
Big fan of Nebbiolo.
Nebbiolo, Syrah, Malbec, Cabernets, Tannat, which is a lovely grape from Uruguay. So these different, and these are kind of the top main grapes that have the highest concentrations of resveratrol.
And so what you're saying is that there is different ways to get different levels of resveratrol, which is one of the major components of its health benefits. Of course, there's many other polyphenols. And we'll talk about things that can detract from the wine, that is pesticides, insecticides, but that's mainly the growing process. But it's not just the grape. So like you said, Pinot Noir, but it's also where it's grown, Oregon, then St. Laurent grape, which is out of, I think, France. I think that's in the, I'm not sure if it's a Rhone or Bordeaux region, but that would fit with that. But then it's also the stress of, so it's the type of grape, it's the stress of, but then also there's research that suggests the age of the wine, and that the actual aging increases the resveratrol content. So it's not that just if somebody says, I want the health benefits of wine, what we're saying is that you can actually say, I'm going to choose wine that is going to provide me with better health benefits. You don't have to guess. You can actually go, I want a Pinot Noir. I want it from an organic vineyard in Oregon, and I want it aged quite a bit.
Yeah.
So guess what? You're maximizing the health benefits just through the resveratrol.
Yeah.
So we can be selective.
Yeah, right. And also we are in this incredible organic vineyard right now.
I don't want to leave.
We're in this amazing organic vineyard, and because we're talking about resveratrol content, organic wines are, these grapes are having more stress. They're being exposed to nature. There's less pesticides or no pesticides, herbicides, things like glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen that tends to be sprayed all over the wines in the U.S., and especially very heavy concentrations, unfortunately, in Californian wines. And so being organic or having biodynamic farming practices, those grapes are having more stress from the environment because they're not covered in pesticides. So they tend to produce, again, more of these polyphenol compounds.
So what you're touching on there is the concept that alcohol is a component in wine. There's components within the wine that have immense medicinal or healing properties. But then also, so that's the benefit there of wine. It's the total package, if you will. But we also are detracting from the wine through the growing process. And the way I approach this with wine, Dr. LaBant, is that I look at it as just another indication of the toxic environment that we live in. And I would tell people this, that we know that water can be toxic. Does that mean you don't drink water? We know that food can be laced with chemicals and hormones. Does that mean you don't eat food? No, you make choices. that produce the best opportunity for nutrition that's not laden with toxicity. And I think wine is just another example of that toxic laden burden in the growing part of that. So let's talk about that, because what we've been talking about is just the wine itself, the benefits of it, but what about all the growing processes, that the chemicals that brings in? And you touched in on it a little bit. So that also, I think, has been shown to actually reduce the resveratrol content. So it's a little bit of a double negative, because it takes away the stress that the grape receives.
Right.
And in that, it makes it a weaker grape and a weaker resveratrol content.
It's cutting corners.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's taking the easy way out, and a lot of the times it's made more for mass production or adding things to the wine that actually can create more stress within our body, things like additional sulfites, because we all know, well, we don't all know, to create wine, when you ferment it, it has to produce sulfites, but you can add things to it that a lot of people, notably have reactions to, like sulfur oxide, or there's a process called chapitalization. I may be, a vintner might tell me I'm saying that wrong, but this is a process where they can actually add sugar, they can add must, they can add grape juice to the wine. Must, yes. And this is all to not make the wine sweeter. It's because they're putting more sugar in it that it's causing the alcohol content to go up. So you're getting these really hot wines and really high alcohol content wines that really are, and if we're talking about consumption and lower alcohol contents that are more appropriate for health, the higher the alcohol levels, the more sugars that are in there. Of course, they're not just chemicals that could be being put in the wine, but they're really taking away from the health benefits of something like red wine.
Yeah, and you see that in the resveratrol. Again, it's just another manifestation of the toxic environment we live in. Yeah. So it's taking away the stress from the grape, but it's actually adding it to us. Yeah. So let's touch really briefly on this concept, because people go, okay, you mentioned sulfites, and I look on a bottle and it says sulfites are there. Sulfites are a natural part of the fermentation process, right?
Right.
So you can't say something's sulfite free if it's fermented.
It's impossible.
Right.
There's no way you can even make wine or make alcohol without that the sulfites being produced. It's an end product of the fermentation.
But they're adding to it.
But you can add to it for flavor, for texture, for alcohol content, and this is really, I wouldn't say it's cheating, but it's a way to enhance the wine or the alcohol content of the wine.
But that's still even in the wine making process once the grape's been harvested. Yeah. But when we look at actually the production, the growing, the viticulture part of it, which is where we're at an organic winery here, and this is how wine should be drank, with friends and in nature. And I think it's a good picture of it. But natural, organic, biodynamic, sustainable, these concepts people hear bandied around, but what does that actually mean, those four concepts? From like, organic, what is organic? How is that maybe different than natural? How is that different than biodynamic?
Yeah, so natural wines, it's sort of this umbrella category versus a non-natural wine, but natural wines are either organic or they're biodynamic. And so organic winemaking means that they are either certified, with a organic certification. They've gone through all the rigors to, hold that title, but they are, and they are either limiting or fully reducing the amount of pesticides, chemicals that can be put on or into the wine. And then biodynamic, I think you explained that a little bit better earlier, but it's really a process that's kind of using the whole of the land. They're using more compost, so it doesn't necessarily have to be organic, but it's the farming practices as a whole.
Yeah, so the biodynamic's a beautiful process of the viticulture, but it's basically understanding and looking at the vineyard as a living organism, if you will. And it is, it's not a viewpoint, it is. And then organic is, yes, eliminating the pesticides, insecticides, but it's more of it's a stamp of approval, certain regulations you have to meet. But I think that when you look at biodynamic, in many ways that provides organic, but you can have a winery that is biodynamic that's really following the organic principles and natural principles, but yet they don't have the label,
Right.
but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's going to be wine at its pure form in its traditional format. So I think it's important to understand that. And by the way, I think the gentleman that we were talking to before about this winery here, he said that Finca La
Carrodilla.
Carrodilla, there you go. See, I botched that. And thumbs down on that one, so on my fault. They were the first organic winery
In Mexico.
in Mexico in 2019.
So not too long ago.
It's super exciting because we see a lot of organic wineries now here.
Yeah.
Because we were looking to try to find some, and there's too many to choose from.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a little scary because it's only been 6 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the, the viticulture here tends to be organic, but they're the first to have that full certification, I believe, and which.
Because this is Organico Mexico,
Yep.
and then USDA organic, and then they also got certified CCOF organic. So I'm not sure what that is, but it's another one. So so they're triple certified.
Yeah.
It's like saying triple board certified. They're triple certified.
Right.
So, but that's an interesting point because we don't see a lot of organic wineries in the U.S.
No, they're pretty far and few between.
And we were talking about that over lunch. We had to go off-roading to get to this fabulous, it's considered, Andres, what you said, the best breakfast in the world, 2 years in a row, Michelin star, 2024. And it was amazing, amazing. But we were talking about that culture. I think it's more of a culture thing to be interacting in a good way with your surroundings. And I think it's something in the Hispanic culture. And so it makes more sense that organic would take off quicker here. I mean, is that your take on it? Because you've been spending some time down here in Mexico.
Yeah, well, I think it's a more accepted practice, and I think in all of Mexico, people tend to live more off of the land, no matter where you are, unless you're in a big city like Mexico City. But even then, the majority of food is all prepared by hand. It's fresh. People are living off of the land or sharing within their community. So I think it's just a more culturally accepted practice to have things be cleaner, more natural, more organic.
And unfortunately, America's gotten away from that. So it's one that I think the regulation has favored that lack of living off the land, and it's been mass production. So we're at these small kind of, I would say, boutique wineries where, they're small production vineyards.
Yeah.
I mean, the one we were at yesterday, they said they made 2,000 bottles a year.
Yeah.
We didn't ask them yet here how many they make, but I'm sure it's at the same small level.
Yeah, and they're using traditional, mostly traditional practices, so kind of older style methods of making wine, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. So here, this is very interesting. It was an article published. You can find it online. Again, check out the show notes. The references will be there. But they looked at French wines from 1935 to 2000, and they were working to detect pesticide residues there. And they were looking at this through the viticulture process. And this study actually found a rise in wines containing multiple pesticide residues, increasing from 14% in 2016 to 50%. In 2022. And in fact, a 2018 European Union report on pesticide residues found that 86% of grape samples had quantifiable pesticide residues, with more than 68% containing multiple residues. So when we talk about additive, we think 1 + 1 = 2. And here it's more synergistic because 1 + 1 = 10, but this is in a bad way. It's not one residue that people are encountering, it's multiple. It's multiple. So now we're getting pesticides in our wine, in our water, in the air we breathe, in our skincare products, in our food. We're saturated with it. And so if we get a stacking of these negative pesticides and compounds, no wonder we're seeing a massive uptick in chronic diseases associated with aging. we're simply a product of our environment, just like the grape is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned glyphosate earlier, which comes from, it's Roundup.
Yeah.
It's what they spray on your grass on the golf courses to make it nice and groomed. I have a patient out in kind of the east part of Arizona, and she can see them spraying the fields with the glyphosate. And we tested her levels, and they're through the roof, right? Active cancering process. We know that glyphosate is a carcinogen, but that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how many components can be in our food supply and in these grapes.
Okay, so let's talk about that because we didn't really touch on that too much yesterday. We talked about how ethanol was declared a carcinogen, class 1A carcinogen in I think it was 1987, but there's some other things on that list that might surprise people of class 1A carcinogens. What might those be?
Yeah, so alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen, but so is hormone replacement therapy, which also includes birth control.
Yeah.
It's hand out like Skittles,
Yeah.
right? It's really sad, unfortunately, and people really should be screened before going on birth control or hormone replacement therapy, in my humble opinion. Epstein-Barr virus, which is mono, is a class 1 carcinogen. Tobacco, we have all these other, compounds that, or I'm sorry, like tobacco is a, class 1 carcinogen. Ionizing radiation, some of the chemotherapeutics that we're using are, and I'm sure you can touch on that, are known carcinogens as well, and that can contribute to these active disease processes.
Yeah, it's really kind of startling how we can get caught into bias because, I mean, obviously I'm biased for red wine. I think so are you. And so we have to recognize that we're all biased in certain ways. And then it's the ability to recognize that bias, but then being able to, I think, challenge your beliefs or your thoughts on the concept that I think help to make us less biased, but it's the blindness to our bias that I think creates big problems. And I think that's what we have in this statement from the general surgeon. But when you look at, people go, well, I can't have wine because the alcohol, it might cause cancer. It's like, well, cyclophosphamide is a chemotherapeutic that, guess what, is a class 1 carcinogen. Tamoxifen, selective estrogen receptor modulator. So if you have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, it is a class 1 carcinogen. Yes, it can be used to treat the breast cancer, but guess what? It increases endometrial cancer. Yeah, this is not a give and take process there. And you mentioned the Epstein-Barr virus, hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, Helicobacter pylori, HIV, even parasites, okay? Opisthochus viverrini, Clonorchis sinensis, and Schistosoma hematomium. These are different types of parasites that are equally class 1 carcinogen. So I think it's important just to understand the context there, that when we talk about ethanol and people say it's a class 1 carcinogen, so the general surgeon says no amount of alcohol is safe, even one glass of red wine, it has to have proper context because he's alluding to the fact that it is a carcinogen. That's what he's alluding to. And he says that actually in the article. But what about all these other things that he would so gladly, like prescribe Cytoxan if he was a medical oncologist, or tamoxifen? That's a standard of care. So it's okay to prescribe that. But if we want to get out in nature and relax and enjoy company of friendships and colleagues and talk about good times and old times and the stress we've had over maybe some time period, we won't mention anything, and then enjoy a glass of wine out in nature where it's produced. No, that can't be done because that's a risk. But please take this chemical.
Yeah.
I find it preposterous.
Yeah,
it's comical.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And it's also unfortunate because in our previous episode, when we were talking about all of the research, we took a dive into all of the literature that's out there supporting the components of red wine, like resveratrol and such, and we went through all of those mechanisms, outlining where those benefits may be. And I would just encourage the Surgeon General to take a look, take an hour. You can quickly find quite a bit of articles out there that do show benefit, and that not all alcohol is created equal.
And I would actually make this suggestion too. He could pour himself a glass of red wine as he did it. and make it that much more enjoyable. Get some health benefits out of it too,
Sure.
as he learned about the health benefits. There was a really nice 2014 article, Dr. LaBant. They talked about red wine extract, and it was that which was derived from the long vinification process, so the more older age wines. So it's not just that older wines are more expensive. If you ever have the pleasure of getting to drink an aged wine that's a good quality, you taste the difference.
You do.
And there's health benefits there too. But they found that these red wine extracts actually they exhibited superior anti-proliferative activity, but it was not just because of resveratrol. It was because of the stacking, the additive components together. And they specifically highlighted here quercetin and resveratrol being synergistic in the anti-proliferative or anti-growth mechanisms. And we talked yesterday about, surprisingly, that quercetin is in wine, but when you take wine in its whole and enjoy it in its proper context, in moderation, amongst family, with food, in the environment, it becomes an immense synergistic effect. But here it's just, they're talking about quercetin and resveratrol.
Right.
So people might take resveratrol as a supplement, and they might take quercetin as a supplement, but yet if you drink a glass of red wine, you're getting both.
Yeah.
You're getting both.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful nutritional therapy.
There's also a lot of other trace minerals and elements in there, like magnesium and chromium. There's so many.
Well, and no, that's very true. Research has shown that when you look at these minerals, they actually are provided by red wine. So particularly trace minerals, chromium, iron, copper, manganese, nickel, zinc.
Yeah.
And we know how important zinc is and manganese is for the immune system.
Of course, yeah.
And so it could be actually I wouldn't say, use it as an electrolyte mix, but, coming off of a workout, I'm going to go have a glass of red wine and get my zinc back. No, I wouldn't advise that.
Yeah. No.
But it can provide some good sources there.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's kind of a holistic benefit there.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually read a study. It was about, they were following people that had severe obesity and hypertension, and they had them drink 250 milliliters of red wine with lunch. It was called the Wine at Lunch study. And what they found was
I bet they didn't have anybody have trouble signing up for that study.
So, that's about 8.5 ounces of wine. That's more than a glass, right? That's about a third of a bottle. And what they found was that they were tracking their blood pressures postprandial, and they went down without their medication, just having some. I'm not saying everyone needs to go and have a glass of wine at lunch, but it was really a fantastic study to read.
Well, look at cultures that do.
Yeah.
Italy, Portugal.
Yeah, a lot of the
France.
blue zones.
Yeah, a lot of the blue zones.
Yeah.
It's wine in context of life.
Yeah.
Brings life, because I think this concept of how we practice medicine is, again, very symbolic and similar to the process of wine.
Yeah.
Look at the vineyard. It's all interconnected. These vines are interconnected, producing fruit. We're humans. We're meant to be interconnected through relationships. In fact, you see this when individuals are isolated, they die younger. But here, it's the interconnectivity through relationships, family, that's similar to the grape. And when we do that, we produce fruit. And that fruit bears the effects of life.
Yeah.
And so for me, and that's where I think when I go back to Jesus, it's like, I'm sorry, he made water into wine. He might beg to differ with the general surgeon.
Yeah.
I'd pay money to see that debate. Jesus on one side, the general surgeon on the other. That would be must-see TV.
Yeah, fantastic.
So let's talk about mycotoxins, because herbicides, pesticides. I think people are very aware of that, unfortunately. But mycotoxins are toxins produced by fungi, and of course aflatoxin is one of the most potent things known to man.
Yeah.
But ochratoxin is a toxin that is very prevalent in the wine industry, and a problem. And I know you know a lot about mycotoxins. So touch a little bit on that as a whole, but then kind of tie that into the wine concept and where we need to be aware of that in this process?
Yeah, well, mycotoxins they're symbiotic with us, right? They're fungus, they're mold. It's unfortunately a part of a lot of the foods that we consume on a regular basis. Like aflatoxins are really high on in peanuts, the concentration there, or a lot of different nuts. Coffee is very high in mycotoxins. Grains like cereals and rice, they have a lot of mycotoxins or mold on them, and orchotoxin is also one of those. But grapes in particular, they tend to populate with mycotoxins, and it's just a part of that natural growing process. So I'm not sure it's something we could even fully avoid in organic farming, but it's something to definitely be aware of, because you can actually test your own body for these compounds. And so there are ways to kind of help detox that out, or at least look and see what that load is, and how it might be affecting your body. Mycotoxins, there's a lot, we don't have to go into all the different kinds, but they can be nephrotoxic, so damaging to the kidneys. They can be neurotoxic, so, causing neuroinflammation. And a lot of them, like orchotoxin actually can be, or orchotoxin A, can have oncogenicity in them, meaning they can have the potential to cause cancer. Does that mean there's a cause? Is that inferring causality? No, but it really depends on how your immune system and your body handles that. But it is true that wine or red wine can be high in these mycotoxins.
Yeah, and so I just try to be fully disclosed about there's different parts of the process of winemaking. The vinification process, or where it's grown.
Mm-hmm.
There can be sources for toxins being added to, which detracts from the benefits. Then in the winemaking process, further toxins can be added in, and that can further detract from the wine health benefits. So I really wonder if the wine we have today is not as healthy as what it once was.
Mm-hmm.
So might even these studies be more dramatic in their significant effects if we were truly producing the wine that was of its original source. And I think that is, I think that's real.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very happy to be in Mexico, where they're being very active in driving this process of returning it back to
nature.
Back to nature, back to the natural process. What do you think we have to do in the U.S. to do that?
I mean, we need tighter regulate, or we need to have tighter, or make it easier for farmers to obtain those certifications, right, in those processes. But I think that, non-organic farming, I think the reason a lot of it's there is for more mass production.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my concern. I think it's with the mass production that there has been this push to cut corners, because it's there about the quantity, it's not about the quality. Right. And we talk a lot about that in how we treat patients. It's about the quality, not the quantity.
Exactly.
And you look at how cancer patients are treated, it's about the quantity. It's one size fits all. Run it through the mill. That's right.
Yeah.
And so really, in a way, what we're talking about here with wine is it's kind of that precision cancer care that we talk a lot about. It is the exact right treatment for the right patient at the right time. But at wine, it's the right environment for the right grape, for the right production of the right resveratrol count and the right health benefits. So
in moderation.
Always in moderation. But I wanted to touch on this on closing, because I call this wine the Great Smear Campaign, and we highlighted the general surgeon. People go, what? Medicine has always been honest with us, and we can always trust them. And the reason why we've talked about this is because I sense that there's this massive narrative that is intentional, probably, to steer people away from health products. And, if we just look at, 2019 to 2023, the COVID-19 pandemic, take your pick there about what medicine was not right about. Saturated fats from the 1950s to 2000s, take your pick there. That was wrong. The food pyramid. 1992. So you were alive, but not by much.
Yeah, it was little.
So I can remember when it
But
came.
I still remember the Time magazine that had the big stick of butter on there, and it was like, don't eat fat, right? But it was really, don't eat margarine.
Yeah.
Right? Because
But again, but it's the same thing. It looks like butter, but it's not butter. It's margarine. Well, alcohol, it's in wine, but there's so much more to the story.
Yeah.
And there's a shallowness to it. And a lot of people would say, well, that's unintentional. I don't know. I think it's intentional because these people are paid to be intentional. The vaginal mesh, which I was a part of, this is where thousands and thousands of women were harmed because doctors didn't realize there was a difference in the microbiome on the belly as in the vagina. Now, we're sitting here drinking a glass of wine, talking about the microbiome in the different areas of the body, but I think even a non-doctor would go, well, I could tell you those environments are different. Doctors didn't know that. Antibiotic overuse, hormone replacement therapy for all women, which ended in 2002, basically, because there was a study of Women's Health Initiative. It came out and said, yeah, there's some groups that would not benefit from it. Opioid overuse, which continues. Calorie counting is a sole factor in weight loss, but eggs are bad for you. So, I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a repetitive pattern.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the water and the air, everything now.
Yeah. So, well, what else about wine do you think people that have questions about it that we've not touched on that would be a benefit to them to understand that it's the wine in the context of life that brings life, but it's the wine outside of that context that actually could hurt life?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we have but haven't touched on is the big question that we get from our patients all of the time. And a lot of our oncology patients, right? Doctor, can I have a glass of wine, right? I don't even know how many times per week I have patients ask me that. And I have no problem prescribing red wine in moderation for patients. And you don't need a prescription for it. You don't need my approval. But I think that, the topics that we've touched on, making sure if you're looking for kind of the highest content of health benefit of resveratrol and quercetin, to pick the grapes that you and I talked about, Pinot Noirs, Nebbiolos, Malbecs, Syrahs, Cabernets, picking wines from organic, sustainable, biodynamic farming, and also considering those cooler climates that also have, known additional health benefits. And so I am confident, comfortable recommending to my patients it is okay to consume wine in moderation on even a regular basis.
Yeah, and the science is very clear on that and repetitive, Dr. LaBant.
And I think it's an unpopular opinion, but
it is. But honestly, following the science sometimes doesn't necessarily equate to popularity. Right. It's about following the science. And when you talk about moderation in women, you're talking about one glass, and men, you're talking about 1 to 2. And purely there, we're talking about body surface area, size-wise, as being the big difference and the separating fact. But I, too, am of agreement with Dr. LaBant that in proper moderation, when it's coming from those source, wine is a part of healthy lifestyle. Healthy living can be something that a patient with cancer can take part in. But of course, as you said, moderation is the key. And we will be bringing you more science, more updates on this. And I'm going to be doing a solo podcast because they have to go back to where they're staying tomorrow. Which don't cry for them because it's on the beach. It's just terrible. So you're de-stressing there again. But I'm going to talk about a 2019 study where they actually compared diluted ethanol, 200%, to aged wine and young red wine. And they found stark differences, and it may or may not surprise you. Did you know that most studies are actually looking at 200% diluted ethanol as their alcohol? I don't think that's 200% diluted ethanol.
It's most definitely not.
Yeah, no, most definitely not. So thank you for joining us on this podcast where we've dove deep into wine here at the Finca La Carrodilla winery here in Carrodilla. Got to be corrected. I am El Gringo. So, and here in the beautiful Bayou de Guadalupe, and encourage you to share, like our podcast. That is, again, pre-scribe.com. That's where you'll find it. And wherever you download your podcast from. You can also find me over at off-scriptrx.com, where we talk about all things repurposed medications. Of course, Goodyear.com. That's D-O-C, Goodyear.com. And of course, all the social medias associated with those brands, including Instagram, dr.goodyear. That's my Instagram handle. Dr. LaBant, where can they find you?
Yes, and thanks so much for listening. You can find me at drmirandalabant.com. That's drmirandalabant.com, or at Instagram at drlabant.
And again, you can find these two wineries. We will tag their location in the notes below. You can find them down here in the beautiful Valle de Guadalupe. And I want to thank both wineries for opening their doors to us, and it has been a unique experience. I want to thank Andres behind the camera, actually reconnecting with us, family and friends, all getting back together. Of course, my wonderful wife. And we are now going to enjoy life and health with a glass of red wine.
Salud.
Salud. See you on the next podcast.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.